And through my own research and even doing some different functional medicine testing, looking at my gut microbiome, I actually came to find that a lot of my issues were stemming from my gut. I had a lot of bacteria imbalances, something called dysbiosis. I had a good amount of inflammation, and the bacteria in our gut, they're not just dormant. They're not just like hanging out there and doing nothing. Like they are literally connected to every system in our body. So when people ask me like, how important is gut health? I'm like, this is what it did for my life that Western medicine wasn't talking about or wasn't addressing.
Welcome to another episode of the Beyond the Scale podcast. I'm very excited about today's guest. We have Rachel Scheer, a functional medicine nutritionist who began her career in bodybuilding and athletic performance. However, just a couple years in her practice, she began to suffer from severe IBS. After many false diagnoses, spending thousands of dollars on doctor visits and tests, and one doctor even suggesting the removal of her large intestine, Rachel decided to take her gut health into her own hands by taking a gut-centric approach to her healing and regaining full function of her gut. Rachel has a virtual private practice with a team of registered dietitians where she now specializes in addressing the root cause of chronic health conditions like IBS, autoimmunity, and weight loss resistance. Rachel is also passionate not just about healing our gut and our health, but also creating a life of abundance where she believes you can truly have it all. So welcome, Rachel, to the podcast. All right, Rachel, welcome to the Beyond the Scale podcast. I'm so excited to be sitting here with you. I have been following you on Instagram and learning all of the things about how important it is to take care of our gut health and about the microbiome, which I still feel like so uneducated on. And I can't wait to dive into all the topics with you today. So thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you for having me on, MK. As you know, gut health is my favorite to talk about. So I'm excited to nerd out and talk all about the thing.
Awesome. Well, before we do that, I want you to share your backstory with our audience just so that they can get a glimpse into like what your life used to be like and then what led you to be the expert in your field today.
Yeah, thank you for asking that question because I do think it's important for anybody to know how crucial gut health is to actually know what it actually did for me. And I dealt with so many gut issues coming from being a fitness model, bodybuilder. You know, for me, a lot of my life was about health or what I thought was about health. I was the epitome of what I thought I needed to look like to be healthy. I had six-pack abs. I'm competing on stage. I'm the cover of bodybuilding.com, Trains magazine. And physically, I was fit on the outside. But as things progressed after 3 years in competing, I was empty on the inside. And not to mention just emotionally, I wasn't in the best place. But physically, my body started to really shift. And I would get chronically bloated every single day. I would look 6 months pregnant. And what was funny is I had a six-pack abs, so I kind of looked like a Ninja Turtle, is what I always tell everybody. I couldn't use the restroom anymore. I started to battle severe constipation, acne, and I hadn't had acne since I was a teenager. It was actually so bad that I was put on Accutane when I was younger, but now it's like coming back again. And I did what most people would do. And I'm like, hey, what is happening, right? What is happening with my body? One, I had gone to school at Baylor for nutrition and dietetics. I was now a nutritionist, actually working in clinical. I was a fitness model, bikini competitor, and I'm like, this doesn't make sense as to why I'm dealing with all of these health issues. I go to Western medicine and they do what they normally do. They did blood tests and a couple of other different things and said, hey, your thyroid's a little bit low. That's really the only thing that came back. So here's thyroid medication, and they sent me on my way. And things continued to get progressively worse for me. And I could now not eat anything without being in massive pain, and it wasn't just like, okay, I have some like stomach cramps or things like that after eating. Like, girl, I'm talking about like debilitating gut issues where I remember one night actually lying on the kitchen floor crying and like having this fear of what I could even eat. But knowing that I needed to eat because I was now very malnourished, and just I felt so lost and stuck in my body. I even have a memory of myself like laying in bed and just thinking like, this isn't my life. Like, this isn't my life. This isn't real. This isn't real. How can this be happening to me? And you have to realize like a lot of my identity had also been in fitness and health. And here I am like feeling very, very betrayed by my body. So I continue to go the Western medicine route to try to continue to search for answers. I do colonoscopy, endoscopy, CT scan, MRI, and I just get slapped with a label of IBS or irritable bowel syndrome, which I consider a trash can diagnosis because it's really not a diagnosis at all. Essentially, we're saying you have an irritable bowel, and we're going to focus on managing the symptoms. So that's a whole nother rabbit hole I'll go into in a little bit about labels and trash can diagnoses and getting to the true root cause. But for me, Western medicine really failed me in a lot of ways. You know, I'm struggling with gut issues at this point now. I didn't have any menstrual cycle, was put on thyroid medication, I'm depressed. I'm doing all the right things, or at least what I thought I was at that time of my life. Now, at this point, the constipation had gotten so bad that I couldn't even use the bathroom anymore without an enema. So I don't know if anyone knows what an enema is, but I could go into detail, but it's not very cute. I mean, you're putting things in your booty to try to get you to go to the bathroom, essentially. That's how I had to use the restroom every single day. So they sent me to a colorectal surgeon now at this point because, hey, I'm not using the restroom. That's really bad for your body. And I meet with the surgeon and they tell me, okay, this is probably something you've had for most of your life. What we can do is we can cut out your large intestine and we'll sew your small intestine to your rectum, and this will fix a lot of the constipation issues, right? Because a lot of stool is held in your colon. Yeah, that was my rock bottom. That was the point where I was like, something needs to shift. I mean, I was at the point where I was so desperate, I was considering to get the surgery, to be completely honest. Like, I was that desperate. And I know for a lot of people, they've been at that point of rock bottom or desperation in their health where they feel like they have to make a decision. And sometimes we want to make that easy, quick fix, right? We just like, I want to go this direction, just fix it. I don't want to deal with this anymore. Like, I get it. Like, I was there before. But I made a decision there in that moment that I wasn't going to get the surgery, that I felt like there was something else going on that really Western medicine wasn't talking about. So that started my obsession with learning everything about gut health, because I had these Western medicine doctors, you know, doing all these scans and these blood work and giving me all these medications, but they weren't really looking at what was truly happening in my gut. And through my own research and even doing some different functional medicine testing, looking at my gut microbiome, I actually came to find that a lot of my issues were stemming from my gut. I had a lot of bacteria imbalances, something called dysbiosis. I had a good amount of inflammation, and the bacteria in our gut, they're not just dormant. They're not just like hanging out there and doing nothing. Like, they are literally connected to every system in our body. We actually produce most of our serotonin in our gut, which is our body's main neurotransmitter that helps us feel good and have a sense of well-being. Our hormones like estrogen are metabolized in our gut. We have something called the estrobiome. Our thyroid hormones, which play a big role in our metabolism, are converted throughout the gut. And all of these things were off with me. So as I found that I had all these bacteria imbalances, which actually came from stress, some different dietary triggers, and I started actually healing my gut microbiome, which, don't get me wrong, was not a quick fix by any means. It took a lot of key targeted protocols with different supplements, addressing the stress in my life, like getting to the true root cause and not just taking a medication or one supplement. It was a combination of a lot of different things. But eventually, you know, I could go a few days and not be in pain and go to the bathroom. Eventually, a few weeks, and I remember I got to one point where I was like, wait a second, I don't remember when the last time was that I even noticed any of my gut issues. And my skin started to clear up, and I felt more joyful. I felt more happy. And you know, when I went to go get blood testing done, like my thyroid levels were coming back up, and everything started to improve once I healed my gut. So when people ask me like, how important is gut health? I'm like, this is what it did for my life that Western medicine wasn't talking about or wasn't addressing.
Wow, that story. And I want to go back to when the doctors told you we're going to remove your large intestine, because I bet in that moment the doctors weren't even asking, what's your daily routine like? Are you exercising? What food are you eating? Like, they probably weren't examining those things.
No, they don't ask those questions. They don't
Yeah,
say, tell me about your stress, tell me about your training. They don't look at any of those things,
right.
and I think that's what's really wrong with our system right now is we give people a label. We give them these trash can diagnoses, which is IBS, PCOS, which is polycystic ovarian syndrome, or all of the other, disorders out there. We could say depression, anxiety. We say, here's a label. This is what's wrong with you. Here's a medication to start managing the symptoms without actually getting to the true root cause. And we know that most chronic disease in the body comes from lifestyle related issues. Most physicians don't have the time nor the education to really ask the appropriate questions.
Right.
Physicians aren't even trained in nutrition. They maybe take 20 hours worth of nutrition through their entire, career, which, don't get me wrong, I have nothing against Western medicine. We need it in acute-based care and settings. But what I'm talking about is people who are struggling with these chronic health issues where, like me, you feel like you're doing everything right, like you're supposed to be doing, but you're not really healing, and you're going throughout your life like surviving instead of thriving. That's really a problem.
Definitely. And from the outside, everyone probably thought you had it all together. Like you were on the cover of a magazine, like you said, and you were the epitome of health. But on the inside, you were not feeling that way. And many of our members at Fit Body Bootcamp, it's like they think that they have these problems. They go to the doctor. They don't even know. They're not thinking about what's causing them. And then they have a doctor just saying, oh, here's what you have. Take this medication. And so not only are they leaving feeling more loss, but they're making the problem worse by taking this medication and never addressing the root cause of what caused them to get there in the first place. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Getting all of these different Band-Aid type medications. And it is unfortunate, right? And they're probably given all the blood pressure medication
Right.
and all of these things, which in some settings, like people, they need that. A lot of people aren't willing to make the necessary lifestyle changes. Like I had to have a real conversation with myself and say, hey, I'm willing to do whatever I need to do in order to heal my body.
Right.
Like I always say, people who have gut issues, they are the most disciplined people you will ever meet in your entire life, because I work with a lot of them. And they got to the point where they're like, I just want to feel better again. I am sick and tired of feeling the way that I feel. I need answers. I need support. Tell me what I need to do and I'll do it. Now, some people, right, they can be at the point where they don't feel very good, right? They look in the mirror and they're not very confident in how they look. Yes, they're taking some medications because maybe they got some insulin resistance, metabolic syndrome, inflammation kind of stuff, like the normal kind of medications most people
Right.
are on who are overweight and not taking care of their body. But they're like, yes, I don't feel that great, but I don't want to give up what's so comfortable in my life. I don't want to have to give up the food. I don't want to have to give up the alcohol. I don't want to have to, oh my gosh, start working out. Like that sounds awful. Like I don't got time for that. And so they stay in this middle ground here. So I do think it does take somebody to get to that point where they say, my health and healing comes first. And it's more important than anything else. And the person does have to get to that point. And I was at that point, and some people, they aren't in their journey.
I love that so much, which leads into my next question, because I want to know, what was the most challenging thing to give up? Like, what was the part when you started diving into, these are the supplements I need to take, these are the choices I need to make with my nutrition and things that I need to eliminate? What was the most challenging part in the beginning?
You want me completely honest?
Yeah.
The food was not the food was not a problem for me. Like I was willing to cut out whatever I needed to in order to heal my gut. Like my diet back then, right? It had a lot of what I call diet foods, like the pre-workouts, the post-workouts,
Right.
the foods that are very like low in calories, but with artificial sweeteners and gums and fillers that we now know wreaks havoc on our gut microbiome. So physically I was fit, but my gut really wasn't.
Right.
So I was able to cut out all these things from my diet. And for the longest time, I thought it was just some kind of a trigger I had in the foods I was eating. I'm like, okay, just cut out more, just cut out more. And eventually I got like dwindled down to very little food, right? So that part was easy for me. What the hard part was addressing the shit in my head, to be completely transparent.
Wow.
That was the hard part for me because I was coming from a place in my life, now hindsight looking back, where honestly, my view of myself and health and fitness was very shame driven. What do I mean by that, being shame driven? I mean that I was trying to almost punish myself to try to get to a certain body composition, to feel a certain way. And it's actually coming from this place of unworthiness. It's trying to prove something to ourselves because we don't truly feel good about ourselves, right? So coming from this place of shame in a lot of ways. And for me, I had to get real honest with myself because I was pushing my body actually a little bit too far on the fitness side, right? I was competing in bodybuilding, but I didn't have a good relationship with myself. And I think a lot of people start out on their fitness journey coming from this place, right? They look in the mirror and they're like, I hate what I see. I hate my body. I'm not happy where I'm at. And then they want to punish themselves. They go into a really restrictive diet. They do all of these different things and then they can't stick with it. They can't stick with it. And that's because the place that they're coming from, right? It's a punishment. I don't like where I'm at, which may be what got you started, but eventually we have to shift into this other place of I'm doing this because this is adding to every area of my life. I love how I feel after I work out. I love the food that I eat because my gut feels good after and because it gives me energy and I feel awesome throughout the day and I'm not crashing and I don't like feel exhausted at the end of every single day. Like I love what I'm doing. And when we can come from that place, it's easy to maintain. Now, what I was doing when all my gut issues and everything came about was not sustainable, right? Like I'm competing in bodybuilding and I was under a ton of stress. So like, I know that's not the sexy answer, but the hardest thing for me was truly the stress component and where I was coming from. And the whole person must heal for the gut to function optimally. And if we really look at it, why do so many of us struggle with our health and all of these issues? It's because of the place we're coming from with ourselves. We're trying to shame ourselves to get to a certain point, and that just doesn't work.
That mindset is everything. And I'm so happy that you shared that. And it wasn't like giving up alcohol was the hardest thing, because people get so stuck in their mind. And our clients at FitBody, it's like they have this goal and they think like this should be, say it's to be 150 pounds, but then they start working out and they're building strength, they're building muscle. Well, maybe their body composition completely changes and they never reach 150 pounds, but they still have in their mind that that's the weight they should be. And at Beyond the Scale, we're always talking about like living life not by a number, like you're not defined by metrics, and it's about how you feel and how you feel on the inside and the outside. And so the fact that it was just getting out of your head is so interesting, because I really thought you were going to say, oh, giving up, processed carbs, like, I don't know, sugar, something like that. Wow. Yeah, that's awesome.
When you can get to the point where your healing and health comes number one, it's not hard,
right,
to sometimes have to give up those things, right? And it doesn't mean forever, right? But it does mean sometimes for a period of time, like what I'm doing right now is obviously not serving me. That's really where we have to get real and honest with ourselves.
Right.
What I'm doing right now, between the foods I'm putting in my body, between my exercise, is not serving me with how I feel every single day. It's not. And what I need to do is start putting foods in my body. I need to start exercising, and I need to create a regimen for my health that actually serves, whether it's my healing or my overall health. That always has to be the lens that we're looking through. Most people look through, well, what feels good in the moment, right? And if we look through that lens, yeah, it's hard to give up carbs or it's hard to give up alcohol because it feels good in the moment. You can still feel good in the moment. I don't know about you, but I was like, I want to feel good all the time. And I'm just not going to sacrifice those itty bitty moments for like what, I don't even know, 10, 30 seconds of pleasure as I'm like eating a couple bites of food, which is really only enjoyable at the beginning side, in order to like sacrifice my healing of all these health issues that I was struggling with at the time. And to even comment a little bit on what you were saying about the number and the scale, we have to ask ourselves, why are we so fixated on getting to that number? What about that number gives you that sense of worth, right? When I get to this number, then I'll be good enough. For who?
Right.
Who said that that is the number where you're going to be the happiest, where you're going to feel like you did it? Like, the number doesn't matter. The number doesn't matter at the end of the day. How do you want to feel every single day? And that's the question I ask all of my clients. Like, for me, I want to wake up excited. I want to wake up full of energy. I want to look in the mirror and look at the person back at me and be like, damn, you look good. And
right.
too, you're a fucking badass.
You feel good.
I want to be able to do I want to feel good every single day. Yeah. And be very confident and proud of my body. But, actually I'm like 12 pounds heavier than even when I was competing, and I feel better than I ever have in my entire life.
That's awesome. And what I'm hearing too is that you used to approach your health and fitness with like short-term goals. Like, you were probably eliminating certain foods and training very hard for your competitions, but now you're looking at it as a lifestyle approach. So taking on things in your fitness routine and your nutrition, looking at it as a lifestyle approach and something that you can sustain over time, which is so relevant for our clients at FitBody, because they come to us and they want that quick fix. They want, okay, eliminate these foods and you're going to lose 10 pounds in 6 weeks. Like, it's not that easy. And even if it is, even if you do lose 10 pounds in 6 weeks, what can we do for the rest of your life? And how can we change your lifestyle so that you keep those 10 pounds off? And that's key in what you're saying, is just looking at it as a lifestyle approach.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So if someone, a woman in particular, was trying to examine what foods they're putting in their body for a better gut health, what are a few tips that you could give our listeners and our members at FitBody to start building a better gut health and microbiome?
I'll say 3 foods that we should try to steer away from. So eliminate and then add in.
Okay.
And honestly, if people take this information and apply it, their gut health will change exponentially. So 3 foods that wreak havoc on our gut. 1 is industrial seed oils and vegetable oils. So these are found in most foods when we're eating out, even salad dressings, all of like the fast food that we're getting. These are fats that cause inflammation throughout our entire body, but especially our gut. They're omega-6 fats, and these are one of the worst things that we can have in our diet. So cooking from home as much as possible, we're able to avoid these, but a lot of people are still cooking with, canola oil, right? But restaurants are pretty known to cook with canola oil just because they have a very high temperature that you can cook at. So all fried foods and things like that. I've even been to Whole Foods where you think you're getting healthy foods, right? And then you look at like in their deli section where they have like some of the pre-cooked proteins, and you look in the ingredients and you see canola oil. So avoiding industrial seed oils, vegetable oils. Number 2 is artificial sweeteners. This one surprises a lot of people, but I kind of mentioned pre-workouts, post-workouts, energy drinks are huge with these artificial sweeteners, and anything that ends in an os or an all, is an artificial sweetener. So think of like xylitol, mannitol, sucralose. So although these are calorie-free, it doesn't mean they're still not feeding the microbes in our gut.
Okay.
So if you look at the side effects of sucralose, xylitol, mannitol, you will see bloating, constipation, diarrhea, and that's because they're very fermentable to the bacteria in our gut. Number 3 is sugar. So we know sugar can cause a lot of blood sugar issues, weight gain, but the bacteria and yeast in our gut love sugar. So I always give the analogy, if you kind of can think how bread is made. We have yeast, or used to be made, I should say. We have yeast and we give it sugar, and the yeast actually eats or ferments on the sugar, and what happens to the bread? It rises, right? So that process actually happens in our gut. The bacteria and all the other microbes are constantly fermenting on carbohydrates in our diet, fiber, but also sugar. But sugar feeds a lot of bad bacteria and they produce a lot of this gas. And that's why when you have dysbiosis, you get a ton of bloating, because the yeast and the bacteria are literally fermenting on the sugar in your diet, producing gas and toxins, and now you're bloated and you look 6 months pregnant. Mm-hmm. So industrial seed oils, vegetable oils, artificial sweeteners, and sugar. Now, things to focus on, the opposite of omega-6 fats would be omega-3 fats. So these come from fatty cuts of fish like salmon, fish oils. If you want to be fancy, caviar is actually a great source, or baby shrimp can also be a great source of omega-3 fats. So these are anti-inflammatory fats. So this is going to decrease inflammation throughout your entire body. This is going to support the bacteria in your gut, also decrease inflammation in your brain too. So lots and lots of omega-3s. And then the second one to focus on, I'll say, is organ meat or bone broth, which may be a surprise to some people. So I would say bone broth is the gateway drug to organ meat. So if you're kind of like, ooh, I'm not so sure about organ meat. But organ meat and bone broth, or more so organ meat in particular, has all of the micronutrients as a multivitamin does. It is nature's multivitamin. So it's going to give your body all of the nutrients that it needs and also all of the amino acids that it needs to. So most Americans are very protein deficient. So they're not getting enough protein through their diet. We tend to eat more muscle meat, right? So that's like the chicken breast, that's the steak, the standard kind of protein options. But organ meat is incredible, not only because of the protein source, but also because of all the micronutrients that is going to be awesome for our gut health. And then bone broth has a good amount of collagen, which we know is very, very healing for the gut. So if you're kind of iffy, try some bone broth. It's a great place to start. You can use it in rice. You could just drink it like a tea almost. So I try to do that maybe a couple times per week. And I'm not saying you also have to do organ meat like every day. I'm saying like once or twice a week is actually pretty good. And then the third one is prebiotics. So prebiotics are fiber that feed bacteria in our gut. There are two that I really like to focus on: insoluble fiber. So insoluble fiber comes from cruciferous vegetables. That's your broccoli, your asparagus, your leafy greens like arugula. So these are going to feed good bacteria in your gut. So we want to have some of these in our diet. And then the other types of fiber we can get in is something called a resistant starch. So resistant starch actually comes from things like cooked and cooled potatoes, right? Like weird cooled potatoes, but some of the bonds of the starch of a potato actually turn into something called that resistant starch, which resists digestion. So there's actually less calories in it. And instead, it's a prebiotic fiber that now feeds bacteria in your gut, but the good kind of bacteria. And then as we eat these resistant starches, those bacteria produce something called short-chain fatty acids. And these short-chain fatty acids are actually very protective for our gut lining, our metabolism, metabolic functions. One of the most well-known short-chain fatty acids is something called butyrate. So very, very protective just by getting in a lot of these prebiotics. You can also get resistant starch from green bananas. So if you've ever eaten like a banana and you've noticed like, right, it's way more starchy. It's not like super sweet. So it has a good amount of that resistant starch in it. So those would be my top three that you can add into. I have a lot of other ones you could add into, but I'd say those could be some easy ones to start with.
All right, so more baby shrimp, bone broth, and more broccoli in my household. We're going to start eating more of those.
All in one meal.
all in one. I actually did used to drink the bone broth. I probably read an article somewhere that said it was healthy, but not really knowing why. And did a little bone broth stint, but haven't had any in a while. One thing I did want to ask you, because I know our members at the gym are always asking about this, especially during like a challenge season where we're doing a 6 or 8 week nutrition challenge. Alcohol. How does alcohol affect your gut health?
Not good.
Not good. Well, yeah, clearly not good.
Yeah. No, I'll elaborate a little bit more. But yeah, that's one of the biggest questions I get is, can I drink alcohol while healing my gut? How does alcohol affect my gut? It's a toxin, and alcohol has been shown to break down the gut lining, lead to something called intestinal permeability, which intestinal permeability is also known as leaky gut, where now we get bacteria, foods, and toxins leaking into our bloodstream, and this is actually the root cause of most food sensitivities. A lot of people brain fog. For other people, even systemic inflammation. So alcohol, no bueno for the gut, for our bacteria. This can kill off a lot of good bacteria, dysbiosis, and then of course, intestinal permeability. So I'm not saying you can't ever have a drink,
Right.
But if you're somebody who's healing your gut, like you actually have gut issues, I would say no alcohol at all. If you're somebody who wants to be optimal health, we want to minimize alcohol.
Right. And what about caffeine? This is a big one too. I know for me personally, I am a big coffee person. I've eliminated it during both of my pregnancies, but then as soon as that baby comes out, I am coffee all day. And I know that is not good for your gut health. So talk to us a little bit about how caffeine and coffee in particular can affect your gut.
So caffeine is kind of interesting, right? So caffeine in itself, I don't think is necessarily bad unless you overdo it.
Okay.
So caffeine, if you were to think of it, it's kind of like this arch, right? So like 100 milligrams of caffeine can actually be very, very beneficial for like cognitive focus. It can work kind of like a nootropic for the brain. I wouldn't say it's bad at all for your gut health, but if you overdo the caffeine, let's say when you start to get up to like the 300 milligrams per day, now we kind of start to see like a net negative overall. Your cortisol, your stress hormone levels are going to be a lot more elevated. Cortisol is very catabolic. This could actually break down our gut lining overall. You're going to feel more anxious. You'll have anxiety. You'll be very, very jittery. So you're not really going to get the benefit that you wanted. So I'd say like kind of finding that sweet spot, 100 to 150 milligrams of caffeine per day is pretty good. Getting caffeine from natural sources like green tea is awesome. I do think it affects the body a little bit differently. But coffee itself, so coffee is good for our gut health. So coffee is actually a bit of a polyphenol in of itself. So there are some benefits if we're getting the right kind of coffee. Now there are a lot of coffees out there that have all of the flavors adding in to it, which is not good for our gut health. And even a lot of coffees have mold in them too, which mold is not good for our gut health. Yeah. So most of the time you want to look for coffees that are actually, they say mold free. For example, Dave Asprey.
Yeah.
Dave Asprey, his whole line, he had mold toxicity. So he actually created his whole line of coffees to be mold free. Organic because of how much mold is typically found in coffees. And I've done a ton of testing on people before, and they came back with high mold coming from food.
Wow.
And that will wreak havoc on your gut.
So I just need to keep drinking coffee, but drink really good coffee. Make sure it's mold free.
Really good coffee.
Really good coffee. I want to shift the conversation a little bit because you did touch on this. And I know that you speak on this topic a lot on your platforms, and it is your cortisol levels. And as a woman, as a business owner and a mom, I tend to just naturally get stressed out. What are some signs that our cortisol levels may be way too high or way too low?
So high levels of cortisol, that's our body's main stress hormone, is typically going to be shown in our mood and our energy levels throughout the day. So you probably notice this when you ever are hangry, right? We've all been hangry before, where we've gone too long without eating and we feel kind of shaky, we feel a little bit irritable. So what is actually happening there? Your blood sugar dropped, which is a glucocorticoid, and your cortisol levels picked up. So if you ever notice throughout the day you're irritable, you're just feeling stressed in general, you're feeling kind of shaky, that's a big sign of cortisol levels elevated. Now, high cortisol in the short term, like acutely being raised, is not bad. That's totally fine. Like when you work out, your cortisol is going to spike. When somebody cuts you off in traffic, your cortisol is going to spike. That's what our body's supposed to do. Now, where this becomes problematic is when our cortisol levels are chronically elevated. We're chronically going through stress. We're not sleeping enough every single night. Let's say you're getting 6 hours of sleep every single night. You're in a sleep deficit. So our body is going to then upregulate our cortisol to try to help us get through the next day. So that's chronically elevated. And that chronically elevated cortisol essentially is going to impact your mental clarity. You're not going to have a whole lot of focus. You're going to, get a lot more distracted throughout the day. You're going to feel more irritable. People are probably going to annoy you a whole lot more to go along with it. But your cravings actually increase quite a bit too. So people who have elevated cortisol, again, it's a glucocorticoid. they crave a lot more sugar. So let's say you haven't slept very well, your cortisol is elevated, now you're craving a lot more sugar, now you're overeating, and now this is actually affecting your body composition and your weight quite a bit there. And we also know that cortisol levels actually then now downregulate our hormones also in the body. So this can now decrease things like testosterone. So our testosterone levels decline. This can lead to loss of skeletal muscle mass, and this can lead to excess body fat production quite a bit too. And that's what's really happening there when people say high cortisol, right, leads to body fat. Most people are overeating, and then their sex hormones are changing to go along with it. They're losing muscle mass. They're in a more catabolic breakdown state. And then they're also putting on a little bit more fat there. So those are some of the common things I see with high levels of cortisol. And I'd say, honestly, the best thing we can do for, managing stress is sleep.
Okay.
I know that's like a little bit backwards, but
Yeah.
if you're not sleeping every single night, you're gonna really, really struggle to manage stress, right? Like think about the times you've had 8 hours of sleep. You wake up, you feel good, and some things kind of pop up throughout the day, and your stress resilience is so much higher. Your stress threshold is a much higher. Now, give somebody 4 hours of sleep, 6 hours of sleep. Every little thing is going to activate you. So your cortisol levels are already elevated in general, but you just don't have the same stress resilience throughout the day. So instead of like giving people little hacks, right, and saying like meditate or take this supplement, I say like get sleep. Make that like your number one priority and watch everything else in your life improve.
Oh, I love that. And it's like sleep is one of those things where we always downplay how important it is. And we make up excuses for ourselves as to why we cannot get in bed at a reasonable time and why, we have to. For me, I used to coach at Fit Body Boot Camp and I would wake up at 4 a.m. And then I know in order to wake up at 4 a.m., like I need to go to bed by 7 or 8. Well, 10, 11 o'clock, I'm still awake knowing I have to get up. And you're right. Midday, like I'm done. Like I cannot deal with any problems. I cannot deal with customers that need my attention and energy. It's tough. It really is. So just prioritizing sleep is definitely downplayed and something we need to focus on. So I want to ask you, because I think this episode can lead to so many more topics that our listeners would love to hear about from you. But then also maybe someone's listening and they say, well, maybe I do need to work on my gut health, or maybe I do need to address my cortisol levels. What would be a test or some testing that someone could get done to know what's going on with their body and how they can start on that path to healing?
Yeah, this is actually a lot of the testing that my practice does at Rachel Scheer Nutrition.
Okay.
We look at gut microbiome, hormones, adrenals, right? Because you go to your primary care doctor and you say, hey, can you test my cortisol levels? They're going to test your cortisol right in the morning time.
Mm-hmm.
And why that's problematic is because your cortisol fluctuates throughout the day. So your cortisol is actually supposed to spike within 30 minutes when you wake up. And then it goes down, and then it stays a little bit elevated, and it should be the lowest at night, right before you're trying to go to sleep.
Mm-hmm.
So this is what's called a 24-hour adrenal test, typically best measured through saliva. So this is one of the tests we do to try to see what's going on with somebody's stress response, or if they have any kind of adrenal fatigue, which we didn't really get to dive into, but that's low cortisol, where now their cortisol has been so high, kind of think like a diabetic, and now
Mm-hmm.
they're low cortisol. And it's kind of like the opposite. What we'll see there with somebody, they're like so exhausted all the time. They're run down, they barely like feel like they can function. They feel depressed. So they like high cortisol is like that really overstrung person.
Yeah.
And then burnout is like, right, that low fatigue energy. So that's tested through the saliva. We then do a stool test as a gut microbiome test. So that helps me look at all the bacteria in the gut. If there's gut pathogens, if they're digesting everything very well, if they have dysbiosis or SIBO. That's my favorite test because, as you have heard throughout this entire talk, your gut is so essential and it's connected to everything. And from that, I could really customize somebody's diet based off of what they need in order to heal and optimize their gut health. Blood test will look at things like hormones, thyroid, deficiencies, inflammation. And then we even do some urine testing to look at toxins. So you heard me mention things like mold, but there can be other toxins that are environmental, glyphosate, BPA, heavy metals, mercury found in fish. So we test people for that because that is a huge root cause in a lot of chronic health issues, gut issues, neurological disorders. So as you can see, it's very different testing.
Yeah.
If you go to your doctor and you say, will you run a gut microbiome test on me? They're like, what are you talking about?
So what would be, if someone was to work with you, do you help facilitate them taking all of those tests wherever they're located?
Yeah, that's what's so incredible with us being a fully virtual telehealth clinic is everything's done over Zoom through our health portal. But then all of the lab tests are done in home except for the blood test. So we send someone to a blood draw location using their zip code closest to them. And then they do the stool, the urine test, and the saliva test in home.
That's awesome. Well, that's great. Well, I would love to learn so much more from you. And I know that our listeners are going to get incredible value out of this episode. One thing that I like to ask all of my guests before we go is, what does beyond the scale mean to you? What does living beyond the scale mean to you?
That's such a beautiful question. I would say living beyond the scale is living your most optimal health, where you feel your best every single day, where it's not fixated based off of a number, but it's solely based off of I'm thriving. I wake up excited every single day, and everything that I'm doing for my health, between my exercise and my nutrition, it is adding to everything that I do, between my relationships, between my work, between my own purpose. And yeah, I'd say that's
I love that so much. Well, Rachel, where can our listeners find you if they want to find out more information on your coaching program and then just your content?
You can check me out on Instagram at Rachel Scheer and at Rachel Scheer Nutrition. I have 2 pages. One's mine, and then the other is my practice page. And then you can check out my website, rachelscheer.com, if you want to learn a little bit more about my practice and some of the testing we do.
Awesome. Well, Rachel, thank you so much for being a guest today. I know all of our listeners will get incredible value from this episode, so thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.